Yayoi Kusama was born in Japan in 1929. She began studying traditional Japanese painting, but later moved to New York City in the United States to pursue her interest in abstract expressionist art. She became a part of the pop movement in New York in the 1960s. She is best known for her art using the repetition of polka dots, her infinity room installations, and infinity net paintings. So for today's lesson, for preschoolers, I really love these do-a-dot art markers. These may not be washable, but they are my favorite preschool art material. So let me just show you these really quick before I go to the rest of the lesson. I've got a scrap piece of paper here to show you. But these just create these wonderful, colorful dots, and it's really good for developing the fine motor skills of preschoolers. So it's important that they use an up and down dot motion like this. If you try to scrape or draw with the marker, this little sponge will tear, and that's really disappointing. So it's a good way for them to learn to follow instructions and to control what they do, how they make marks. And there are even books or printables online to have them do their dots right on top of printed images. You could have them do dots in a line or a pattern or the shape of their name. Anyway, it's one of my favorite art materials for preschools, and it really lends itself to Yayoi Kusama lessons. So I just wanted to point those out. But for our more elementary and middle school crowd, you're going to need a piece of paper. I've got a watercolor paper, but really anything will do. I'm using a Sharpie to draw with, but you could use a pencil or crayons, oil pastels. Then for my colors, I'm using oil pastels and watercolors. So to begin, I'm going to draw some mushroom shapes on my paper, and then I will add some dots of color and pattern, and then I'm going to use watercolors to fill in and make sure my entire paper is covered with lots of color. So I'm going to make one mushroom right in the center. Start with a little bit of a curved line and make a line that's about parallel. This is the base of the mushroom. I'm going to round the bottom with a smile and the top with a frown. And now I'm going to make almost like two arms coming out near the top. And then for the top shape of the mushroom, I'm making kind of this swirly shape, and then another line to connect it, like so. And then you can also make mushrooms with a similar but a little bit different shape, like these simpler ones. So these are more of a button-shaped top. Like so. Okay, so I'm going to stop with the Sharpie here and switch to some oil pastels for lots of color. So what I'm going to do is fill each shape with a series of dots, and I'm going to start making larger dots in a line in the middle of the shape, and then as I get farther from that line, my dots will become smaller. And then if I'd like, I could make them get larger again. It's really up to you. I'm kind of mimicking Kusama's style that she used on her mushrooms and some of her pumpkin art that she's really well known for, those pumpkins and mushrooms with the rows of dots. So I'm just using one color inside each of these shapes that I've made. One color for my dots, and then I'm going to paint with a different color. So now I'm going to use some purple dots underneath the cap of the mushroom. And you could use markers, crayons, tempera paints with a Q-tip would be really fun for this project. And next, I think I'll make some yellow dots all along the base of my mushroom. So go ahead and color your mushrooms using these rows of dots, and then we will get to coloring the background sections as well. Okay, so I've filled my mushroom shapes with lines of dots, and now I'm going to go over those with watercolor. The watercolor will not cover over your work if you used crayon or oil pastel or Sharpie. However, if you used regular washable markers on this section, like these Crayola markers, that would bleed. So you don't want to do watercolor over top of that. You could just use more markers for this step. So I've got some water here, and I'm just going to start filling these areas with paint. I'm choosing to do this watercolor over oil pastel because I find it to be a really quick way to fill an area with color. I've got, you know, a medium to large sized round brush here, so it doesn't take me much time to fill in these areas with color. Okay, now for the background, you may want to wait for your watercolors to dry, but I'm going to rush a little bit. And the next step would be to add a pattern all over the background. I'm going to use Sharpie, but you could again use crayons or oil pastels. Actually, I think I will use a crayon. I'm going to use this kind of teal colored crayon. And I'm just going to create a geometric pattern, almost like crystals growing in the background, and fill the background of my piece with those polygon shapes. You could use more dots, you could use circles or squares or triangles or really any kind of pattern that you like, swirls. This is just what I'm choosing. Okay, so now I've filled the background much like I did the mushroom shapes, and so I could leave it like this. I actually kind of like it. The white and the color have a nice contrast. Or I could fill the entire background with a color, and I'm going to try that. So the mushroom painting that I like the best has a black background. It's hard to get a real dark black with watercolor, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I can just paint thickly with this watercolor right over top of my crayon because I pressed nice and firmly with the crayon. Or if you were using oil pastel, it should go over it almost effortlessly like this. Now I didn't let my watercolor in the mushroom dry, so it's bleeding a little into the black background. If that would bother you, then you need to make sure to let one area dry before you work on the next area. Okay, so now I'm going to let this dry. It occurred to me that I really like the original painting for its dark background with the bright colors of the mushrooms. Another way you could get that effect would be to do your mushrooms on white paper, cut them out carefully, and then glue them onto a black piece of construction paper. And maybe you could use some white or a different color crayon to still get that pattern on your background piece of paper. But this one's pretty cool. I think it'll look even better when it's dry. So I hope you've enjoyed this Yayoi Kusama inspired art lesson, and we'll see you again next week here at BRAHM.